This is Land of Havilah 8b. The priests placed the ark in the new temple, and a cloud filled the temple, but it wasn't an ordinary cloud because it was physically unapproachable. The priests weren't able to remain in its presence. It was Yahweh's glory, verse 11. Solomon and all the leading citizens of Israel are present, standing out front, and Solomon's about to open his mouth to address the crowd and to address Yahweh. 2 Chronicles 6:13 informs us that Solomon was on a bronze stage that he built for the occasion, which was 5 feet off the pavement. First up, he's going to explain to the assembly the meaning of the cloud, verse 12. Then Solomon said, Yahweh has said that he would dwell in the thick darkness. Comment, he's telling them that Yahweh is in the cloud, just like on Mount Sinai. When there was a cloud on Sinai and smoke and thick darkness, God spoke out of it. Quote, the people stayed at a distance, but Moses came near to the thick darkness where God was, Exodus 20:21. So the cloud which is in the temple, and may be billowing out of it, is so thick it's producing a darkness, as Solomon referred to it as a thick darkness, and God is in it. Now Solomon will address Yahweh in prayer as we go to verse 13. 2 Chronicles 6:13 says, as he prayed, he knelt on the platform and lifted up his hands. Solomon says, verse 13, I have surely built you a house of habitation, a place for you to dwell in forever. Comment, a place for you to dwell in forever. There's a ring of sadness in that, since we know the Babylonians destroyed this temple a few centuries later. But we can't say the prayer was unfruitful because God's going to salvage some aspects of it. We know Solomon's father David expected to, quote, dwell in the house of the Lord forever, Psalm 23:6. That was before Yahweh had a house at all. So there will be a forever house of the Lord where we will dwell, and Solomon's house is a forerunner of it. So there's definitely a forever component to what Solomon said. So the forever part isn't a total loss by any means. True, Solomon's temple came to demise, but there will always be a house of God for us. Verse 14. The king turned his face around and blessed all the assembly of Israel, and all the assembly of Israel stood. He said, Blessed is Yahweh, the God of Israel, who spoke with his mouth to David your father, and has with his hand fulfilled it, saying, Since the day that I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I chose no city out of all the tribes of Israel to build a house, that my name might be there, but I chose David to be over my people Israel. Now it was in the heart of David my father to build a house for the name of Yahweh, the God of Israel. But Yahweh said to David my father, Whereas it was in your heart to build a house for my name, you did well that it was in your heart. Nevertheless, you shall not build the house, but your son, who shall come out of your body, he shall build the house for my name. Yahweh has established his word that he spoke, for I have risen up in the place of my father, and I sit on the throne of Israel, as Yahweh promised, and have built the house for the name of Yahweh, the God of Israel. There I have set a place for the ark, in which is Yahweh's covenant, which he made with our fathers when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. Comment, Solomon is tracing the recent history of the temple. He says, My father David wanted to build it, but Yahweh answered him, No, not you. You're going to have a particular son who'll sit on the throne, and he's going to build it. That encounter between David and Yahweh is in 2 Samuel 7. And now, a generation later, Yahweh has established that word. Solomon, David's son, has indeed occupied the throne and built the house. In verse 22, Solomon says, Yahweh's covenant is in the ark. The only things in the ark are the 2 tablets with the 10 commandments, which is the central part of the covenant. If Israel keeps those, the covenant will be in good shape. It's not the whole covenant which is on scrolls, but it's the core of it and the representation of all of it. Verse 22, Solomon stood before Yahweh's altar in the presence of all the assembly of Israel and spread out his hands toward heaven. Comment, it says Solomon is standing before the altar, which would be the outdoor altar for burnt offerings, such as the one that stood in front of the tabernacle. But there's been no mention yet of an outdoor altar at the temple. 2 Chronicles 1:5 clarifies the matter. They set the original altar there in front of the temple for this occasion, the same altar that was in front of the tabernacle, the one that the craftsman Bezalel built in Moses' time. It's now about 480 years old. It was about as long and wide and high as the passenger compartment of a car, Exodus 37:1. So that altar was there, but there was a new altar as well, 1 Chronicles 2:1, which was much larger, 30 feet by 30 feet and 15 feet high. Obviously, they'd have to climb steps to place any offerings on that. So both altars were present, 2 Chronicles 1:5 and 2:1, but we don't know which one is referenced when it says in verse 22, Solomon stood before the altar. Verse 23, and he said, Yahweh, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth beneath, who keeps covenant and loving kindness with your servants, who walk before you with all their heart. Comment, there's more to this relationship between God and man than a dry covenant in stone or what's in black and white on scrolls. Verse 23 mentions the loving kindness part of it. The stone's cold, but the loving kindness is very warm. It's the loving kindness which Yahweh keeps toward his people who walk before him with all their heart. Yahweh's interested in a very close relationship, the kind that takes all our heart, as it says in verse 23. Since that relationship is so close, like between husband and wife, there can't be any tolerance for unfaithfulness. That would completely blow up an otherwise loving relationship. Solomon's still speaking to Yahweh about Yahweh, verse 24, who has kept with your servant David my father that which you promised him. Yes, you spoke with your mouth and have fulfilled it with your hand, as it is today. Comment, that's so beautifully simple in expression. Yahweh speaks with his mouth and fulfills with his hand. His words become action. His promises become fulfillment. He doesn't speak idle words. His words have power because he won't let them fall to the ground unfulfilled. From mouth to hand. Verse 25, now therefore may Yahweh, the God of Israel, keep with your servant David my father that which you have promised him, saying, there shall not fail from you a man in my sight to sit on the throne of Israel, if only your children take heed to their way, to walk before me as you have walked before me. Comment, there's another tinge of sadness in that prayer for us because sadly, Solomon and his successors on the throne did not take heed to their way or walk before Yahweh the way David walked. Therefore, David will fail to have a descendant on the throne forever, and that part of Solomon's prayer will go unfulfilled, at least in the way he's envisioning it. But here again, this tinge of sadness will be swallowed up because God will come through where man failed. Yahweh's going to raise up a descendant of David who will take back the throne and occupy it forever, King Jesus. When the covenant failed, God fixed it. When Solomon's prayer failed, God salvaged it. Verse 26. Now therefore, God of Israel, please let your word be verified, which you spoke to your servant David my father. Comment, indeed Christ was the verification of that man on the throne forever. God doesn't let his own words fail or the faithfully spoken words of his children like Solomon. Verse 27, but will God in very deed dwell on the earth? Comment, yes, indeed, God will dwell on the earth. Christ was coming. Still in verse 27, behold, heaven and the heaven of heavens can't contain you. How much less this house that I have built? Comment, Solomon realizes the inadequacy of a $480+ billion house to contain Yahweh. Extremely, woefully inadequate. But amazingly, Yahweh has chosen to recognize it. Verse 28, yet have respect for the prayer of your servant and for his supplication, Yahweh my God, to listen to the cry and to the prayer which your servant prays before you today, that your eyes may be open toward this house night and day, even toward the place of which you have said, my name shall be there, to listen to the prayer which your servant prays toward this place. Comment, the part about the name being there comes from the writing of Moses, Deuteronomy 12:5. Amazingly, the God of the universe has agreed to put his name at stake by coming to this little venue. You couldn't get a rock star to play in a high school gym or to come to any inadequate venue. That would be beneath his name. It would tarnish him. But amazingly, the God of the universe was invited to the temple, and he came. He didn't even wait on an invitation, really. They put the ark there, and boom! And he not only came, but he allowed his name to be used in association with it. Verse 30. Listen to the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Yes, here in heaven your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive. If a man sins against his neighbor, and an oath is laid on him to cause him to swear, and he comes and swears before your altar in this house, then hear in heaven and act and judge your servants, condemning the wicked to bring his way on his own head, and justifying the righteous to give him according to his righteousness. Comment. This comes from Moses as well. If you wanted to get the absolute truth out of someone, you would bring him before Yahweh and make him swear, Exodus 22, 8 through 11. So Solomon's praying that people could come before the temple to establish the absolute truth about any matter, that the fear of God would be such that a guilty party would only tell the truth when standing in front of the temple or when swearing by the temple. Verse 33. When your people Israel are struck down before the enemy because they have sinned against you, if they turn again to you and confess your name and pray and make supplication to you in this house, then hear in heaven and forgive the sin of your people Israel and bring them again to the land which you gave their fathers. Comment. Yahweh said that he would banish the people from the land and send them into foreign lands if they wouldn't keep the covenant, Leviticus 26:33. Solomon's praying that if that happens, may Yahweh return them again to the land. That prayer was fulfilled when a remnant returned after the Babylonian captivity, Ezra 2:1, and also fulfilled in a modern-day miracle when a remnant of Israel returned to the land in the 20th century, verse 35. When the sky is shut up, and there is no rain because they have sinned against you, if they pray toward this place and confess your name, and turn from their sin when you afflict them, then hear in heaven and forgive the sin of your servants and of your people Israel, when you teach them the good way in which they should walk, and send rain on your land which you have given to your people for an inheritance. Comment. The land tended to be dry, so rain was a good thing. Verse 37. If there is famine in the land, if there is pestilence, if there is blight, mildew, locusts, or caterpillar, if their enemy besieges them in the land of their cities, whatever plague, whatever sickness there is, whatever prayer and supplication is made by any man or by all your people Israel, who shall each know the plague of his own heart, and spread out his hands toward this house, then hear in heaven your dwelling place, and forgive and act, and give to every man according to all his ways, whose heart you know. For you, even you only, know the hearts of all the children of men, that they may fear you all the days that they live in the land which you gave to our fathers. Comment. Solomon mentioned a number of plagues, including when, quote, each shall know the plague of his own heart, verse 38. That's a very personal type of plague and maybe the worst kind, a plague of an individual heart. But Yahweh's here to take care of those as well. Solomon prayed that the remedy would be that we would spread out our hands toward him, and that Yahweh would hear in heaven, his dwelling place, and forgive and act. Amen. 1 Kings 8c is next at landofhavilah.net, 1 Kings 8c.